We're going to go to the drivehubler.com hotline and bring on Dr. Alex Carmen. He heads up the School of Criminology at the Tarleton State University in Fort Worth. You're a criminologist, doctor. Before we get to this timeline and some of the disturbing events leading up to the massacre in Texas, you spent years training police on how to respond to any situation, including active shooters. What exactly do you do as a criminologist?
Right, so I have various roles in law enforcement, and one of them is to train police officers. I've trained over 15,000 of them in the past 25 years. And one of the trainings that we often talk about in my sessions is the active shooting scenarios and how to respond to those as well.
So we're, again, learning some disturbing new details today. Nearly 20 officers in the hallway outside of the classroom at the elementary school for more than 45 minutes before they confronted the gunman. Kids calling 911 asking for help. It was an hour. It looks like police waited up to an hour before finally engaging with the shooter. With this, obviously seems like a big misstep on the part of law enforcement, unfortunately.
You know, the reports that are coming out right now, have not been consistent, as you know. So it's hard to really tell whether or not law enforcement did what they were supposed to do or not. What we do know, however, is that in terms of police procedures and practices and training, if you have an active shooter on site, every second counts. The active shooter is taking out lives per second. And so by virtue of that, the instructions, the mandate, the charge that law enforcement has is to engage the shooter, to neutralize the threat, which basically means you get in there, you get in the fight, and you kill the suspect, right? And you shoot to kill, and you neutralize that threat. That is what cops are trained to do. Now, if the situation were to be a hostage-related situation where the person takes somebody into a room and there are some people that are alive in that room, the local law enforcement is trained to evacuate the premises, surround the premises, and call for a tactical unit such as SWAT to respond.
So the practice of waiting for backup while there's an active shooter situation, would you call that an outdated tactic?
Yeah, it's definitely outdated and not certainly what we teach today for police officers to do. Most of these active shooters are carrying ARs. They're heavily armed.
Yes.
And we know that local law enforcement, basically have a 9mm Glock by their side, if at all. And so they're going to be outgunned, unquestionably. But in the end, that's what law enforcement are trained to do, is to engage, to simply neutralize the threat and do whatever it takes. Risk your own life if need be. In order to try to save others.
And Doctor, there's no bigger supporter of law enforcement than I am. And here in Indianapolis on this show, on the Hammer and Nigel show, you're a criminologist. You spent years training police. Looking back, hindsight being 2020, what should have been done that wasn't done here? Just in terms of, we could talk about the door that was propped open. We could talk about security that should have been in place around the school, but overall, what should have been done versus what was done in this situation?
So to address that, let's talk first about the security at the school. Yes. I think it's nonsense right now to be talking about maybe we should go ahead and protect our schools in the rest of the nation. I think that it should be a given. I think we've had enough of these incidents for lawmakers to basically take this seriously and say, here are the dollars, go out there and protect our kids. That's the first thing that needs to be done. And what that means is, have on-site police officers, metal detectors, be able to ensure that people are checking those doors and that you basically deny the entry of a bad guy into the schools. Now, as far as the response is concerned, I think it really does depend on what actually happened versus what should have happened. But what it appears to be up to now is that law enforcement did not act. Once they showed up, they may have actually engaged the suspect, but they did not pursue the suspect. And I think that it's important. It would have been important for law enforcement to have actively pursued the suspect. And if there would have been a loss of life on behalf of of law enforcement. And believe me, I'm also a very strong supporter of police officers.
Yes.
But, that is what they get paid to do, right? To risk their lives and to go into a conflict like this and engage with the bad guy. I think that the, idea of staying behind because they were outgunned, if in fact that is true, and to stay behind and wait for somebody else to show up 45 minutes later is not only out of date, but it's incredibly irresponsible. And one would argue that probably the engagement with the suspect could have prevented lives.
Do you see similarities between what happened here and what happened in Parkland in terms of law enforcement response?
Yeah, there may be some similarities, although once again, every situation is different,
Sure,
right? But
sure.
I will tell you that the killing of people in itself is obviously a horrible thing,
Yes.
especially if they're innocent. But I will say the killing of children. I mean, second graders and third graders. I mean, it's just as evil as it gets. And I will say to you that our hearts and our prayers go with the families and those that survived the incident. But this cannot happen again in our country. I just know that. I've been around for 25 years as a criminologist, and I've never seen the anguish and the anxiety that people are experiencing now in sending their kids to school.
I'll throw this one at you, Doctor. We're speaking with Dr. Alex Del Carmen, a criminologist, Tarleton State University in Fort Worth. Is there an argument to be made about arming teachers in the classroom, voluntarily if they wish to, with training and proper procedures? Is there an argument? You talk about securing schools and having school resource officers and maybe off-duty police officers. What about the idea of teachers being armed in the classroom?
Yeah, I think that's been a hot topic of debate, as you know, for a number of years. But I have personally always believed that it's a good idea to do that. I know it's not a popular stance to take, but I do believe that there are teachers that have former military experience, that there are teachers that have former law enforcement experience, that are well acquainted with weapons. They're well acquainted with the safety of those weapons. And I think putting them in the classrooms, much in the same way as we have the marshals on board the airplanes, will really, when this happens again, it will make that bad guy think about it twice before he or she goes into a classroom to take people's lives.
One more thing before I let you go, Doctor. Do you also advise, I know you've spent years teaching and training police on how to respond to active shooter situations. Do you talk to citizens? Do you talk to people that aren't armed on what they should do and what should happen and actions they should take if they're all of a sudden involved, they find themselves unarmed, involved with an active shooter?
Absolutely. And we often tell people, to hide, to escape, and if those two fail, simply to engage, right? Because they have to survive. You're going to do everything you can in order to survive that incident. And so we do, in fact, instruct people to do it, and the science and the literature have advanced quite a bit in the past 20 years in that area. We have concrete scientific studies now that have been done on those that have survived, and they all tell a similar story.
And I just have to ask you, I mean, you said if worse comes to worse, you have to engage with a shooter, even if you're unarmed. I mean, I couldn't imagine anything more terrifying. How could somebody even begin to do that? Is there a basic formula that you teach and say, hey, if it's fight or die, you better fight even though you're not armed? Is there something can that be easily explained?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, ultimately when, again, if you can escape and you can leave the premises, that's the first thing we tell people to do. If they're not able to do that, then we tell them to hide. We saw that one of the survivors, in fact, of this particular incident here in Texas, actually put blood on her face and pretended to be dead. Right. So concealment is an effective tool. But if that doesn't work, and your loss of life is almost imminent, in other words, you're going to die if you do nothing. We teach people that they need to engage at that point, and the hope is that 2 or 3 engage at the same time in order to be able to overpower the individual, even if the victims, hopefully survivors of the incident, are unarmed, because at that point you're going to die anyway. So you might as well just engage and try to survive versus letting that person take your life.
And we know, unfortunately, those little kids did not have a chance to do that in this case. Doctor, I wish we could be speaking under better circumstances. Thank you so much. Dr. Alex Del Carmen, criminologist, Tarleton State University. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Have a good Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you, sir.